Welcome to Framework and to the penultimate episode of the Nolan-oscopy. We are here with Brett Blake today. We being me, John, and Al, the other host of Framework. How you doing, Al?
That's me. I'm doing good.
Oh, good. And we're also here with Brett, talking about Dunkirk.
Yes.
The big war movie, the big Christopher Nolan British Retreat from France war movie from 2017. One of the most acclaimed films of his career, the only film which he's been nominated for an Academy Award for Best Director for. And I think by acclaim, one of the most popular films, one of his biggest hits, most successful landmarks. I mean, this
is what I was it is acclaimed and it's well regarded, but it's also the one of, outside of like Following or Insomnia, I guess, the one that comes up in conversation the least in my experience. It seems to have been kind of forgotten since it had a good award season back in 2017.
Interesting, isn't it? Like
it did pretty well at the box office. I mean, it wasn't like, one of the smash hits of the summer. But it
was a success in any way you want to rate it.
It's the most successful World War II film ever made.
Well, there you go.
More than Private Ryan, really?
Yeah. I think it's got 50 million on it. I mean, probably not if you adjust for inflation, but
right.
Yes.
Yeah, if you adjust for inflation, there's got to be a bunch of Tora or some shit from way back in the 60s.
The Longest Day.
Yeah, All Quiet on the Western Front in 1928 actually, if adjusted for inflation, made $7 billion or something like that.
Well, shit, Gone with the Wind is a war film of sorts, right?
Yeah.
That would, if you count that. But it's not a war film in the sense that this is. That is a film set during a war or with a war as a backdrop. This is a movie that takes place on a battlefield, more or less. A beach, I guess. But for all that, it is also an unconventional war film because it's a war film where, I don't think you see the good guys, the Allies, fire a shot. I don't think you ever see a German.
Never.
And you never see an enemy.
Right at the very end, kind of in silhouette.
Yeah,
Nazis
that's true.
Coming over the beach there, but
you see a couple faceless troops at the end, and then you've got enemy planes in the sky.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But that's unusual,
And of course, the lines of temporality. That's not
of course,
a
but
regular
that's
word.
very usual for the Nolan-oscopy.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually what I think makes this movie so interesting, because on paper, to me, I think this is probably Nolan's most straightforward movie, right? I mean, maybe Insomnia is in that conversation, but I mean, if you're just looking at it from a 30,000 foot view, this is a very lean, it's like 90 some minutes before the end credits. And it's presenting a very finite event. But you have this whole structural conceit, which is so Christopher Nolan. I mean, it's the Christopher Nolan thing about this movie. I don't think I've ever seen a film where you've got sort of three separate chronologies all covering the same event that are unfolding over three different spans of time that then eventually intersect. And I think that's a really fascinating way to sort of distill down this historical event.
Yeah, it is interesting, and I don't know. I was thinking about this. Like, do any of these work on their own? Could you make a movie about any of these just as its own film? And I don't know that any of them do. They're kind of built to complement one another in such a specific way.
Yeah, I think if you're talking specifically about these exact presentations of these three different elements of the Dunkirk evacuation. Yeah, I don't think they work discreetly. They have to be woven together. I do think, you could do another version of the history of Dunkirk as, a prestige miniseries or something that you could make work. But obviously that wouldn't involve sort of these specific devices that Nolan is using here. He's choosing three very specific facets of what happened at Dunkirk and using them to sort of more broadly embody what this event was.
Yeah.
I mean, you as filmed here, you wouldn't be able to separate them out and have them work on their own. But that's not a reflection of anything really, except that they were filmed this way and conceived this way for a purpose.
Right.
Like, I'm not sure every part of chapter of Pulp Fiction works on its own if you pull it apart like
Exactly.
that. You know, that
Well, no, it is a kaleidoscopic view of the event of the retreat from Dunkirk. I'm trying to get to the essential truth of it by telling three versions of it that kind of match each other up along the way. Not as elegantly necessarily as I feel that they should, but there's clearly an effort to have them converge and snap together, like some sort of Lego piece that kind of makes a whole image complete at the end. I don't know that is the most successful thing in the movie. That the precision of it, which is usually something I expect from Nolan, but I don't know, like the pilot landing in the water. It's 15 minutes of him drowning in a cockpit before what you know is going to happen happens, which is, Rylance is there. We know from Rylance's story that the Rylance boat is there. So,
right.
I don't know. I don't know if it's quite the precision masterpiece that that I would expect from Nolan and expect from a film that is such a technical exercise.
That's the thing, right? Is that this is very much a Nolan movie for me in the vein of Memento or Inception, where it is a technical exercise where it's like the central thrust of the movie is, can we tell a movie this way? And like in all those, the answer is, yeah, you can make it work. Yeah. It comes together, and I'm impressed by it, and I kind of like it, but I never rewatched this after the theater until just now. It never even crossed my mind to do so. It's both more immediate. It's a real world story with real people that has stakes that are a lot more, immediate and flesh and blood than Inception, for example, or even sort of the puzzle box of Memento. Obviously there are some life and death stakes there, but it's not entirely clear what those stakes are at any point. And here it's very clear what there's all these men that are going to die if we can't solve this problem, which is pretty easy to grasp, and it still feels like a bit of a technical exercise, that it becomes all about this structural Rubik's cube that he's enamored with playing with.
Yeah, I mean, the tech exercise thing, this is I think when this came out, that was sort of the main sell of it. Was like, you got to see what he does with this thing. Just the structure alone is so unusual and weird, and just it's like a high wire act seeing him make this work. And I do agree that I think that has its pluses and minuses. I think one of the minuses is that it's not something I'm super invested in emotionally or eager to return to, because I remember the filmmaking. I remember the way that it was structured, the way that the Hans Zimmer score is kind of just like one continuous piece of music that informs all three stories. That the editing choices, just the sort of Brechtian abstractions that sort of distance you. Like, Tom Hardy, you're never going to see his face till the very end. He's wearing a mask the whole time. These sort of choices seem to be, as important, if not more important, than the story of this. The story is almost sort of taken as granted. Like, you all know Dunkirk, right? Sure. It was a retreat. It was a heroic retreat, and it's a pretty good story. That they survived. That's the real heroism in this case. It's like, a fairly straightforward retelling of a British war story, and it's just what you can do with it in the margins, and what you can create, and how you can make that shot work. And look how cool the torpedo looks at night. Shit like that is the heart of the film.
I mean, it's a straightforward story told in a deliberately not straightforward way. Which is so very, very Nolan.
Yeah.
But like you were saying, you mentioned Brechtian abstraction, and that's sort of the thing. Like,
sorry,
for as much as this, but I think that's actually pertinent here. Like, for as much as this is a story that is immediate, and requires so much less setting up than in Inception or whatever, or Batman even. We're right there, sort of from the start of this movie, with this young soldier who's running for his life, and we're like right, over his shoulder. It's almost first person for a big portion of this. And it's almost like that is so naturally immediate and visceral that, of course, like Nolan has to turn it into an abstract thing where we don't, like, it's almost a silent film at the same time, and we don't really get people's names until very late in the game, and we don't see people's faces, and it seems like he's deliberately taking what should be a very visceral story and running it through these all these different ways to make it more abstract.
Yeah, interesting choice. Very a Nolan choice. I mean, it's contradictory to what the film, like. It does feel like, as much as he's invested in the style, this is kind of the most like English patriotic stiff upper lip.
Oh yes,
my heart bleeds for Britannia kind of Nolan that we've ever seen, and at the
100%.
same time, it's just like, Branagh's not going to leave the pier. He's just going to stand. The whole movie. It's just going to be these little I don't know, Dogma 95 rules he's going to create for himself to make things less emotional throughout. And I mean, in a way, that's awesome. That's kind of like exactly what I want from a Chris Nolan war movie. He's not trying to just do Saving Private Ryan or whatever. He's doing something that is so explicitly him. And if there's one thing I have come to really appreciate about Nolan during this, it's that he just does things that are explicitly him, no matter what. Like, it could just be, okay, well, it's going to be the war movie, one of the most famous genres in cinema that everyone takes a stab at. And this one, well, it's Christopher Nolan's.
Yeah, and this is like as earnest as he gets, but like you were saying, but his version of earnest has to be filtered through his android brain, that has to layer all this other stuff on top of it.
I do think, because my reaction to it the first time, I think revisiting it for this episode, I think was the fourth time I've watched it. Saw it twice in the theater. I've seen it once, then since in between. The first time I saw it, my reaction was very sort of in awe of the craft, but sort of kept at an arm's length emotionally. But every time that I've seen it since, I do think it does eventually arrive at what I think is a pretty affecting sort of denouement eventually. Once the moment when the civilian boats start to arrive, sort of from that point towards the end of the movie, I thought it was pretty affecting when I was watching it this time. And I think it's in a moment like that when Branagh sees that this, fleet of, fishing and yachting boats have arrived. That's when you can really sense, at least for me, that this is Nolan's love letter to his homeland in sort of his own Nolan way.
That scene almost stands out in that it's such an emotional payoff and movie largely bereft of them. I mean, it is the promise of making a Dunkirk film, is that you're going to have that shot and that scene. So of course it's there, and it does work. It works, but yeah, it's odd to me that he builds up to it. It's almost kicking and screaming.
I think it's earned by that point.
Oh, certainly earned.
But it's also, again, it is very British, because even when we're saying that it's, or I'm saying that it's, emotionally, that it emotionally works for me, that's on the Christopher Nolan scale of emotional investment.
Yeah.
I think it works given what I expect from him in a film. I think it works better than the emotional stuff, for the most part, in Interstellar, which is probably his most overtly emotional film. A lot of the emotional stuff in that movie does not really connect with me, but I'm not a parent, so I'm sure that has a great deal to do with it.
No, I mean, I'm a parent too, and I'm with you on Interstellar. That, as we went over last time, I think that movie sort of outsmarts its heart. It tries to be a little too clever with its narrative structure, and that undermines it for me in a way. But I had the sort of opposite experience of what you were describing with Dunkirk here, where in the theater it was a more overwhelming experience, and I had a stronger reaction to it there. And then going back to it at home, it's like, one, there is an element to this where it's a little like a movie like Gravity or something, where it's
Yeah.
was like an incredible theatrical experience that I'm just never going to even attempt to recreate at home because it
Right.
obviously will not work.
Same here. Same here with that. I was like kind of dreading revisiting this to some extent because it wouldn't be in an IMAX theater.
And knowing, remembering not a lot of particulars about this movie really, but the basics of who lives and who dies. I mean, remembering the basics that every boat they get on sinks is going to sink immediately, and the main guys all live, but and like what happened to Hardy and so forth. Going back to it, revisiting it, robbed of that immediate sense of, well, these people who are sort of nameless and somewhat faceless, like even the guys whose face we see, like a lot of those kids look alike. In a way, it makes it a little hard to.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little more familiar with what Harry Styles looks like 5 years later.
But maybe.
Yeah, but there's still just a lot of brown-haired 2-year-old British guys running around.
I can't tell them apart. I swear to God.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Which is sort of the point in a way. It's
that doesn't bother me actually, really. And it might be the obvious thing to say that, well, they're just they're representational figures, sort of they're surrogates for their country essentially, because it's really more a movie about Great Britain than it is a specific individual or a group of individuals. It's sort of, here's what this event ultimately meant in the grand scheme of World War II for this country, is sort of where I think the movie ultimately ends up at.
I think that's very effective too. But
yes,
for me, I was saying, like, in the theater, following those kids so closely, there was more of that visceral, are they going to just take a bullet or a torpedo to the skull at any moment? And at home, rewatching it, that sort of robbed of that, knowing basically who lives and dies, but finding that there's not more to those characters. Like, there's not depths to like really appreciate or nuances because they are so representational and sort of intentionally de-individualized.
Yeah. They are. There's no guy who has like a story about like this is what my sister used to say to me, or there's no humanizing.
Got a pregnant wife back home, and
It's
well,
very
there's Barry Keoghan. How do you say his name?
I count those guys as a whole different storyline. I mean, those
those guys have names.
They're people. The dudes on the mole and the boats are just a wash of British dudes. And I saw Nolan talking about this. He actually intentionally says like the cast is meant to reflect the youth and inexperience of the British Army at Dunkirk. Like they're supposed to be kind of people that you don't
accomplished.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like a Starship Troopers kind of thing, where it's there's a meta element to the casting. And that's, I don't know. I mean, I would say despite having these very memorable set pieces, incredible sequences, people drowning, that sequence comes within the context of this story. This main plot line, the mole plot line that takes a week, is the least effective for me for all that. And I think I have,
and that one probably takes up the most screen time, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And I think I have to lay that at the hands of just like the characters are a bit of a wash, like if this guy survives or not. Well, there's literally 300,000 people just like him right there, like it is his genericness, while very much the point, also kind of keeps me from I don't have an emotional tether to it. When they're all fighting inside the trawler, on the beach trawler underground, it's like, well, one of them's going to die. One of them has to die. Oh, just, pick one,
Right.
Okay. I guess it's going to be the French guy because they don't trust him. Great.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, now he's French. And I'm like, okay, now like I'm starting to get a sense of who that character is because, he's the French guy who's sort of trying to infiltrate and passes British because he thinks it'll help him get farther away. But like, that's the first time I have gotten any sense of who that guy is. Yeah. And it could have been the other guy, the other face with that same backstory at that moment. And it wouldn't have like changed my perspective on that. What's either way, like, yeah, I guess they were doing about the same things. I don't know. I couldn't tell you anything one of them did that the other didn't.
Right.
I couldn't even told you like, if you paused it right there, I couldn't have told you which one was like the one that we started with in the street.
Right. The guy is Fionn Whitehead is the name. I don't know who that guy is. I mean, like, he's technically the protagonist of the movie. I have no idea who he is.
Top build, yeah.
Yeah. And this story also, I think this story suffers a little from being explicitly about characters that are, I mean, I don't mean this in a bad way, but they're presented as rats trying to scamper away and survive. I mean, it is, people basically doing what they have to survive. They are very explicitly not quote unquote heroic in the context of this film, which has some like big heroes in it, like Branagh, Tom Hardy, Rylance. They are heroes. In fact, basically it's the name actors. If you're familiar with the actor, they are playing a gigantic British hero, and everyone else is kind of just a wash of people who are scampering, like sneaking onto one boat and then the next, and you don't blame them for it, of course, but like it's notably less easy to engage with it in movie terms.
I think that's by design, and I guess we could discuss whether we think that's effective or not. I think it's pretty effective. And
I do kind of like that. Level, it's one of the more unique things about this movie, and that you don't see a war movie that is sort of like focused on that. I mean, I don't know. I guess there's something like Come and See or something that it still has a much less, even less heroic bent to everything. But yeah, but it's clearly part of the design that they are ultimately, some of the only dialogue we get from that mole storyline is at the end when Harry Styles, or maybe it was the other one who could tell, says, oh, well, all we did was not die. And the blind guy tells him, like, well, that's enough. Like, they're being hailed as heroes, while the guys who did the more heroic things are not.
Yeah. They're all kind of just going about their lives, or they're in a German POW camp. And, and yeah, I mean, I think there's, but what does that mean ultimately? What are we meant to take from that? I mean, it's certainly not a judgment on these guys. We're not meant to think they're cowards or anything like that.
Certainly not.
There's, I even think it's kind of gentle on Cillian Murphy in his story. I mean, which is a character written explicitly to be the coward, and it still has a lot of empathy for him.
And his actions caused the death of, quote unquote innocent boy, essentially. I totally agree, because I think when we get the glimpse of, when we first see him, obviously he's completely shell shocked. I mean, you can tell that he's been through an ordeal that has completely destroyed him. Then when we get the glimpse of him in the mole storyline, before whatever has happened to him happens to him, you can just see, he's not, you wouldn't say he's the nicest guy you've ever met, but he's behaving rationally. He's telling these guys, wait here, we're going to come back for you. And I think that contrast is actually very humanizing, because that this was a person, and in these few days or these hours between when we've seen him in these 2 points in time, he's been absolutely emotionally devastated.
Yeah.
There's something there that I do find, I think is really appealing, or to me, my sensibilities anyway, that, and it's something that I think in the sort of social media era, we're especially bad at processing these days, is that there's a real drive to label, people a hero or a villain. And if somebody does something bad, then there's almost a, retconning of history, such that they were always just anything good that we liked about them. Turned out that they were just a Machiavellian schemer, that they knew they were an evil soul all along, hiding in sheep's clothing or whatever. But I think what is more true to our sloppy existence is that you're not like just a brave person, and that is like something that means you are courageous every moment of every day. Like, you can be brave on one day and a coward on the next day, or within the same day even. And those, like, toggling between those things is way more common and way more easy than we think. And the Cillian Murphy thing gets that across. I mean, it's not like it's unique to this movie. It's the red badge of courage or whatever. Like,
sure.
That, Tom Hardy's a hero throughout all of this, but maybe he's got a bad day in that POW camp where he's just a not looking good, where he's begging for a scrap of food or something that we would not be impressed by. I don't know, but like,
well,
I
he
think
only has to be a hero for an hour. Cillian Murphy has to do
right.
it for a whole week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, just go in and out of the water, and it's and I think that's part of what the grander structure is supposed to do, is that like the mole storyline is about guys who don't really have opportunity for like grand heroic gestures. That
Right.
I mean, they don't get to go take out a machine gun nest or anything. That's not really what their whole job there is, just to escape the sinking ship.
All they can do is live or die. That's their only options, and it's not really a choice, I guess. It's something they can aspire to.
Right, but that's as high as their aspirations can go, is escaping. And I think there's something there that Nolan, that this movie is trying to do, that pointing out how like not all of war is glorious, that more of it than not is this sort of grubby scrabbling for survival. And it's just it's hard to land that point entirely in something as, like I said, as Brechtian as this can be, as
abstracted
in this narrative conceit, like trying to point out that film depictions of war are like not realistic. It's hard to do in something that is this like breaking the basics, like time stream, using film to such
it's explicitly very cinematic. It is like all the aspects of cinema are represented here, like at masterclass levels. The way the score is used, the way editing is used, these shots, the fact that there's so little CGI in this is very impressive. Apparently, they built models and put them on water and stuff like that to make it look. It's why you don't get the big 400,000 people on the beach shot. Apparently, is he didn't want to do a big CGI shot.
It is impressive, but also that is like the part on that I bumped the hardest against, is at the end when they're announcing numbers and it's like, wait a minute, what? Like I know it doesn't really matter. Like, we didn't need to follow another 30 planes in the sky, but when you're quoting these numbers at me, there should have been another 30 planes in the sky. The movie does. He does
try to cover his ass a little bit in dialogue, because I think at one point Bran is like, "How come there isn't more? How come we don't have any more air cover up here? What's going on?" And that someone says, "Well, we have to make sure we've got enough for, when the invasion of Britain begins."
Yeah, but
so he does try to cover himself a little bit there. Which,
but what's the Luftwaffe like? I wanted to call it Lufthansa. That's not right. That's
Luftwaffe. Yeah, that's a
Luftwaffe. Okay. Yeah. See, then I thought I was talking about a Stroopwaffe. Anyway,
they're close.
What are the Germans holding back for? Do they only have one plane? Like, I know this is not an important nitpick. It's just when they throw those numbers out at the end, it's hard for me not to bump on this. Like, just why are the crowds on the beach? Seems like they should have been a lot thicker when you're suddenly saying hundreds of thousands more than I thought we were dealing with.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but at the same time, I'm taking it in the terms of just like, this is not a bird's eye view of Dunkirk. It is, a mouse's eye view. It is, so tied to the perspective of its characters. Now, there might have been room for
we get some literal bird's eye views of the beach
from Tom Hardy's character at the end. There might have been room for that, but up until that,
even before that, I think we get some overhead shots of the beach. But I mean, again, like, and if in an older movie or movie with less of a budget that was less polished, and I would accept this more readily, it's just like, oh, that's a limitation you have to deal with. And here it's just that he didn't want to use CGI, and he wasn't going to go like full Ben-Hur or whatever to keep a cast of tens of thousands of extras around. So I don't know. You could use a little bit of CGI just to fill out the crowd.
No one would have minded.
Crowd scenes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would have been fine. But at the same time, I think, it's because he's such a stickler for even something like that, saying like, well, no, I don't want to use digital crowds. Because he's built that way, that means we also get all of the really impressive physical stuff that he did for real. All of these ships that look like they're actually being sunk. I mean, I don't know I don't know how they did some of this. Everything seems so authentic. And there are moments in here that I can't believe they actually did this for real, but it sure looks like they did.
Yeah, all the sinking. I love those shots when it's like on the bow of the boat and the water is staying level at the bottom of the screen, but the ship itself
Right.
is
He's mounted the camera to the ship, and the ship is moving.
Mhm.
Yeah, that stuff is great.
Love it. Yeah. The tech in this, pretty good tech stuff in this movie. Really impressive. The way it looks, the way it sounds. This won a bunch of Oscars for sounds.
The sound design is unbelievable.
Some of the best ever. With some exception for dialogue. Now, granted.
Well, but on that tech stuff, really, this is the thing: is it's so impressive, but we're also just getting to a point in the Nolan-oscopy where impressive is taking on like a backhanded connotation.
Yes,
talking about these movies.
Yeah, table
stakes. Several of these movies.
Table stakes, like you said in Interstellar. Like you expect an incredible Hans Zimmer score. You expect some of the best editing of a major studio release of the year when you go into a Nolan film. It's kind of what else
is this an incredible Hans Zimmer score? This maybe could be a point of some contention here, because I'm not sure how I really feel about it. I think it works. I think it absolutely works to support this sort of ever-present tension and dread. I do think maybe it's a little too wall-to-wall. Like, I think the entire movie is essentially scored, and I think maybe we could have done with some moments that were, a little more reserved in that sense.
I don't know. I mean, you're certainly right that this is not one of the type of film score that you could take out and listen to as its own like freestanding work of music. It works solely for the context of this movie, which is so specific. You couldn't. There's no other movie that it would work for either, because no other movie really does this type of thing. And it is wall to wall, like you said, but I think that might be essential to, keep these different temporal strata, pasted together.
Sure.
I'd be curious to see a version with a different approach to score. I mean, clearly this is the one that makes sense for this film and what that was devised. I mean, it's written into the script almost. Apparently the whole thing is based on an auditory hallucination, which is that it's supposed to sound like it is increasing in pitch, but it never actually does the whole way through. So Nolan-y, so weird.
And there's a usage of a stopwatch. That I think there's some story about it. Somebody's grandfather's stopwatch that Zimmer is using at various points to get that ticking sound that you hear periodically, which is that's a cool touch. That's a neat sort of little idea. And I also think, for all of the moments that do sound kind of grating and intense, maybe that actually serves to make the moments where you actually sort of hear harmony and more of a melodic idea, those moments actually might be a little more impactful because so much of the score outside that is a little more dissonant.
It certainly is unique. I mean, I don't know. I was thinking of war films in general after this and the various approaches people have taken. I feel like this is now becoming kind of a influential film in war. I base that mostly just off of 1917, which I feel does a lot of the same stuff, a lot of similar tricks. I mean, obviously it has its own gimmick, but like score-wise especially, and I was thinking of that during this. And
I never saw 1917 because it felt like, oh, they're doing like another Dunkirk. It just like,
yeah,
I've seen those, possibly those same two British white boys running around dodging artillery fire. Like,
come on, now,
very similar context.
It's two different 20th century global conflicts. Now, come on, it's entirely different.
Of course,
yeah,
but it's British kids in France both times, right?
Yeah. But I will say, in 1917's defense, I think it mostly is just a gimmick movie, but it's a hell of a gimmick. I mean, it's hard to say it's a fun movie to watch because it is, it's a war film, but I mean, it is viscerally very entertaining.
Yeah, that's not a real judgment of mine. That was an attempt at an honest explanation for why I never bothered. Not because I think the movie's actually like not worthwhile because of that, but it just how the trailer struck me. And it could be better than this movie. I don't know. I haven't seen it. I couldn't tell you.
No, it's in the shadow of this movie to some extent. It's I mean, look, I do kind of want to have a larger kind of war movie discussion maybe at the end of this, but maybe we should
Sure.
at least talk about the other things so we don't have to cycle back to the the Mark Rylance sequence or whatever. I because that one's really good, right? That one's the best segment, right? The sea.
At home, yes. In the theater, the aerial dogfights
Those
were
were cool.
pretty
Yeah.
fucking cool.
Yeah, those are great. But
Well, the
we have to,
dogfights, the just to touch on the sound because we briefly talked about it. I don't know that I've ever heard aircraft sound more dynamic in a film than they do here. It's really, really impressive sound design. Now, again, you talked about dialogue, and that's sort of Nolan's bugaboo in the last decade, where he doesn't care if we can understand what people are saying for the most part, but the overall mix of this movie, I think, is very dynamic.
Well, it seems like this movie he's gone over to outright resenting the existence of dialogue, and he's minimizing it to the greatest possible extent.
Well, like you said, the first, I don't know, 10 minutes of the movie are almost essentially a silent film. Like, I don't know when the first real line of dialogue is actually spoken, but there are large chunks of this movie that absolutely could be a silent film. And I think that sets it apart from Nolan's other work, in the sense that this is not plot driven. There's not a ton of exposition that is needed in order for you to understand the world that this is taking place in. This is driven just by pure cinematic technique.
Yeah, and I mean, he talked about like he wanted to shoot this without a script at one point. Like that was his original plan, which that's crazy. But like there is an immediacy to all of this, and that's why the dialogue in this doesn't bother me like it does in Tenet, because there is a fog of war at play. Like it is explicitly trying to create an experience of just like you're hearing stuff and was that important? Oh shit, doesn't matter, I missed it. Like that's just going on, especially in the mole sequence, especially with when you're just kind of holding on and trying to follow the immediate action of it. And that's where he's going for here. Usually it bugs me when he does this. Like I want things to be clear. I want to hear what's going on. This one, I don't know. This one I give a pass because it's so experiential. And,
well, this is the context where it works the best, especially the mole part and maybe the aerial part has pretty minimal dialogue too. The Rylance stuff is more dialogue driven. But I think that's the thing is the kind of circling back to what I was talking about earlier is that it's weird to try and do a sort of verite thing like that while also doing this thing that is so clearly structured and
the temporals,
it's artificial.
It's very odd.
And I've seen that thing about he wanted to shoot without a script, and I can buy that he thought that the dialogue was so unimportant that he didn't need it. But I think ultimately he could never actually go through with that because, well, no one might not think that might have some disdain for dialogue in some sense. He's also never going to allow ad-libbing on his set, right?
Right. And I mean, it's just the nature of how film is made, especially films at this tier, where you need to, where you get a budget of $100 million or however much this cost. Obviously you can't do that. You probably had to storyboard great segments of this. I would think. Think,
absolutely.
This is like,
you can't be sinking ships and things like that if you don't know exactly what angles you're going to be shooting this from.
Yeah. I mean, I get what he means, though. I get that the idea behind that is that, well, the movie is not a story properly. It's not about the narrative. It's like the least important thing in many ways. It is about the experiences. It's about the visceral, immediate moment for all these characters. With the exception, I think, of Rylance, that you have a narrative on the boat, but that's about it. And even that, falls to the background by the end of that segment.
Another Nolan thing it services is that it allows this movie seems like of all of his things that he has tackled, it would be the movie where there's no room for any sort of big plot twist, but the lack of dialogue allows him to play up this is actually a French kid reveal 3/4 of the way through the movie that we've been following this character who has a secret backstory but because he hasn't said any words, they can play that as a twist.
Was anyone else confused by the name The Mole for that segment? Because I wasn't. Yep. I didn't know what the mole that they were talking about was. I thought it was some sort of rock. Well, no, it is some sort of handmade rock pier, basically, that juts out. When I first saw it, and when I saw it again, I kind of got fooled into, is there a traitor story going on here? Because they talk about that. I heard Bronner reference the mole, and I was like, oh, but it's a double meaning, because one of them's a mole for the German. No, not at all. It's just a confusing, archaic word for me.
Yeah, I mean, he's sort of a mole. He's not like actually trying to feed information to anybody or anything.
No.
But he is, I don't know, under false pretense. I don't know if that counts as a mole. But yeah, it's confusing. I agree. But let's talk about war movies generally.
Okay.
Do we want to just praise Mark Rylance quickly?
Yeah, he's great.
We've already kind of done that.
He's awesome.
Tom Hardy's also great.
Tom Hardy, wonderful. Given almost nothing, somehow amazing in this. That's pretty great stuff.
Acting behind a mask again, like the last time he worked with Nolan.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's almost a joke at this point. Barry Keoghan, what do we think? Good in this, I think.
He's good.
I'm wondering, did he get better because since the first time I saw it? Because I now know who Barry Keoghan is. The performances in this that most struck me are the name actors, and I kind of hate myself for being basic in that regard, because I did not remember Barry Keoghan's performance in this, and I'm just like, you know what, he's actually quite good in this. And it's like, is that just because you know who he is now? Like, I mean, it's a movie that kind of forces you to sort of cling to faces that you recognize a little bit anyway. But
I think he's effective.
He's good in this, yeah.
Yeah, he's fine. I wouldn't throw an award at him for anything. Like, he gets sidelined pretty quickly.
Of course.
But the only performance that stood out to me this time that I didn't remember as being anything special, but I was like, yeah, that guy's actually really good, is the other pilot. Not Hardy, the other guy. That guy's. Why haven't I seen that guy in more stuff? Probably just haven't been watching the right BBC shows the last couple of years.
I mean, I might have and just not recognize him.
That's true.
Yeah.
Still don't know his name.
Yeah.
I like the bit at the end where, they're back home, and they're sort of all the men are coming off the boats, and like some guy points to this pilot and is like, where were you? What were you doing? And he's like not happy at him because he's RAF, and he's like, presumably, why weren't you guys coming more to our defense? And Rylance just sort of taps him on the shoulder, and he points to the guys who were with him on the boat, and he says, they know where you were. And I think that's just a very nice, little human moment. That Rylance, he can sell that kind of thing in his sleep. He's just got such a sort of a restrained gravity to him. It works really well in this performance, I think.
Oh, he's so perfectly cast in this. He's my favorite performance in the movie for sure. He's wonderful in this, and he has that old school British stoicism to him that you can still see the feeling underneath it. It's good when you find out at the end like that his other kid died like 3 weeks into the war. God, this is the thing. This will tie into the larger war thing. I hate this, but I'm a bit basic when it comes to this shit, and I want a character with a narrative and an arc and relatable things that I can really appreciate. I just gravitate towards that. I'm more engaged by that. And Rylance provides that for me in this movie in a way that the rest of the movie is uninterested in doing.
I love how apologetic you are about being more engaged by things that are more engaging.
I want to be the cinema dork who's like, yes, look at these shots. Look at how this is done. Look at the Brechtian abstractions. That I can appreciate this. That's great cinema. No, I want Saving Private Ryan shit. I want these stories to hit me in the emotional core because of their human characters, because they're relatable things, because I engage with an actor's performance and their story being told. And Nolan, especially in this movie, is not particularly interested in fulfilling that.
Well, let me, if I may, I'll make just maybe a slight defense of, or not even a defense. I'll kind of try to explain why I think the ending works on some kind of an emotional level for me. And that's because, you're presented all these touches at the end. You've got the men on the beach cheering after Tom Hardy shoots down that last plane. We talked about the old man who's telling the returning men, "Well done," and that surviving was enough. You've got
These are the
Rylance's
movie
son.
moments. These are the outlier movie moments of this.
Well, yeah, but they're all coming in at the end, and I think this is Nolan's idea of an emotional payoff. You've got the thing where like Rylance's son makes sure that Barry Keoghan's sacrifice is known. It ends up in the newspaper. You've got at the very end, the men are being welcomed at the train station as heroes, and Harry Styles thinks like they're all going to be angry at them because he thinks they failed, which they did. These are things that really
the soldiers didn't, but yeah, it was.
But I mean, the event was a failure. What happened at Dunkirk, it was a lost battle. But that gets into,
and I think there's something there where Harry Styles' character also is not particularly proud of what he how he comported himself there,
right?
But so he's kind of assuming that everybody else in the world
they watched is
aware of that.
They all watched the movie with us. But these are touches that I think could have tipped over into schmaltz, and Nolan doesn't allow them to go there, but they're impactful. There's the whole sequence when Hardy is finally landing his plane. That series of shots is just unbelievably beautiful with the sun setting. Yeah. And then there's the stuff with reading Churchill's speech, one of the most famous speeches ever given, and the touch of having it being spoken by somebody else, I think allows the meaning of those words to actually sink in because you're not distracted by, Churchill voice. So, these moments, those words, the lighting, the music, I think combined, all of it hammers home for me how pivotal this evacuation was in giving the British the will and the resolve to carry on. And this idea that in this terrible defeat, the seeds were planted to eventually overcome. And it all does kind of work for me on, I'm not going to say I get choked up or something at the end, but I mean, I do find it kind of stirring at the end of this movie.
Yeah. I like that it's a war movie that is about to defeat and imparts how that this was a defeat, but it was also sort of one of the most crucial turning points of the war.
Yes.
And that sort of goes back to the Harry Styles thing about how, maybe this is the most important thing you did was just scurry around like a rat for 3 days and get away. And ultimately that is more important because, I mean, if things go completely differently, if the British don't have an army over the next year there.
Yeah. I mean, that's all there. That's like, that's traditional war narrative stuff. That is, I mean, it's taking a real event, and this was the significance of the larger war. Here are the human stories within it. Here is, how these people changed and how they had little narratives that took place within it. It's movie stuff, and he approaches it from this this very British reserve and an unwillingness to kind of go there emotionally that I think is good. And I think it works. Like this is a good movie, a really good movie. Even
it is.
I find myself at this distance from it though, because he wants me to be there. I feel like he wants me to focus on the technical stuff and this stuff at the end. Like obviously he could hit this harder. All of these beats you're talking about, he could really Spielberg those up if he wanted to, and he does not.
He so clearly doesn't.
Right. Yeah, and that's because he's Christopher Nolan. Sure. Would it have worked more for me if he'd played those beats? Have I been trained by movies like Spielberg? I maybe, but I think that is what keeps me from throwing on Dunkirk. For an evening. Sure. I don't think it's a particularly harsh film or a particularly difficult movie to sit through. Like it has the horrors of war, but like less explicitly than other films. Sure.
It's not gory.
No,
there's not much actual blood.
I would sooner engage with Apocalypse Now, I think, which is an incredibly difficult sit, because it's so explicitly about character stories. I think you get the complete panoply of Vietnam in that movie just by virtue of all the insane shit going down within it, and but immediately you're tethered to these narratives, these characters' stories. You know, you have entire arcs going on in that for everyone on the boat, and you get Duvall and Brando and these huge, larger than life characters that sort of demonstrate the madness that was going on in Vietnam. And
Well, but that's a different war too. Like I think
Exactly.
Private Ryan is
sure,
a closer touchstone to go for. And one
sure,
of the great successes of Dunkirk, I think, is how it exists as a World War II movie. That how it exists outside of Ryan's shadow. That it doesn't feel like it's ripping off anything from that, even though it's the same theater of the war, of the same war. The color
it's also
palettes aren't that.
it's also coming
That far
after
off.
it's also coming after several years of things just doing Private Ryan stuff, of films
Right.
that were inspired by Private Ryan, of Band of Brothers, of a lot of World War II media that lived in the shadow of Private Ryan for 20 years. And
Yeah,
that's
but Private
that.
Ryan,
Yeah.
I think there's something interesting there about how it is both more, whatever you want to call it, basic, sentimental, and how it tries to endear us to a cast of characters by giving us their backstory of, here's this guy wants to
Mhm.
get home for this reason, this guy's got this going on, or whatever. And manipulative, it would be
That's
a
the
critical way
pejorative way.
of
Yeah.
saying how it, pejorative way of talking about how it sort of burns through those people throughout, and especially in the finale. Whereas this, but Ryan is also so much more like visceral and gory,
Mhm.
in how it depicts the horrors of war. Whereas this movie is so much more detached from, like, not really trying to endear us to these characters, even though we do end up with quite a bit of affection for Rylance and Hardy and so forth. But it's not laying on sentimentality on anything, and it's not being particularly bloody. A lot of the deaths in here are by drowning, which is horrifying in its own way,
Mhm.
and to a lot of people, like I think myself included, kind of more horrifying than being shot in the gut and bleeding out. But it is, I don't know, antiseptic in a way. It's
Yeah.
it's not stomach churning in
Some
the
of
same
that
way.
might
It's
be,
not going for the gut or the heart in the same way that Ryan is. It's a cerebral movie because obviously Nolan.
I think
Yeah.
that's true. But some of that I think might be just baked into how am I presenting this specific event? Because fundamentally, this is more of a siege than a battle. The Battle of Dunkirk has sort of already happened, and when
Right.
the movie starts, so we're now in the final stages of what's happening here. We've got presumably the French trying to hold off the advancing Nazis in the town, and everyone else is on the beach. So there's not a whole lot of, you're not getting a lot of gunfire, you're not getting a lot of shootouts, where you could potentially get some pretty gruesome stuff. I guess when they're in the hold of the ship, as it's filling up with water, that you could have guys could have met some pretty gruesome gunshot wounds there. But also, I mean, then we've got touches that are not overtly violent that I think are actually pretty horrifying. Like when they're sitting on the beach and they just see the one guy just walking out into the ocean, and it's like,
I love that.
it,
Yeah.
that's a tough moment, and it's not viscerally violent in any way, but it's communicating something horrible.
It's so British to me. The walking into the ocean. It's just such
Yeah, I mean, it's British stuff where like it would be in a Monty Python World War II sketch too, And it's like, oh yes,
Mhm.
there goes
Yeah,
Jenkins.
nothing to do but walk into the ocean, I see. Yeah.
Very good, sir. Yes.
How cool is the foam in this, by the way? Just the best
Yeah.
foam.
Cool or gross?
It's so great.
Weirds me out a little
Well,
bit.
it's authentic seafoam.
That's
It's
right.
a bit of both. It's pretty cool from a slight distance and pretty gross when you get right up in front of
Yeah.
put your face in it.
Yeah, just like
Well-
sheaves of loose skin is what it looks like.
But viewing it from a slight distance is sort of the entire point of this movie. It's the Nolan way. Everything is
Yeah.
sort of approached from that British remove, and that's part of it's Britishness. Part of it is the android brain of viewing everything as like a clockwork puzzle.
Yeah, and So in the end, not really like one of my favorite Nolans, but a very, very impressive and very much him, very much a true representation of who he is as an artist, and also like I was saying, like last week with Interstellar, I like seeing him take on the big genres. Like I like seeing like here's his war movie. That's the kind of stuff that I feel like he really is connected with cinema as a whole and wants to do all these things. I mean, we're running out of the big ones here. That's why I want to see him do a horror movie, or I guess maybe a big satire, like a Strangelove style satire would be interesting. But
his version of a comedy would be weird,
right?
It would have to be so deadpan that you would like not even be sure if it was a comedy.
What would he express in a satire? What would Nolan's version of Don't Look Now be? Don't Look Up be? I mean, his version of Don't Look Now.
Don't Look Now. I'd love to see that. That would be
he could just remake that. He could remake that. Actually, that would be fun. That if he's going to do a horror movie, maybe that's the remake we want him to do.
That's a pretty solid one, actually. That's not a bad idea.
But before he takes that on, we have to get through the horrors of Tenet.
Yeah.
Which
have you seen? It
I
yet?
still have not seen, but I'm told. No, I've been putting it off. Because I didn't want it to like override like my thoughts on Tenet to be like what I ended up talking about here.
I can't wait to hear what you guys think about this, because that's I'm not even sure what I think about it.
My expectations are very low, so I'm hoping that can only help.
Here's one piece of advice: don't overthink it, and don't try to understand it. That's I would go in, just don't try to think about it too much, because you're not going to figure it out. It's not going to make sense.
I'm neck deep in a Nolan-oscopy here. I don't know how. That's the only way to approach these things.
It's not going to end well.
He doesn't give a shit if you understand Tenet. That's the thing. That's the problem with Tenet. I'll say this: I would never be revisiting Tenet if I wasn't doing this podcast. I have no interest in trying to prize that movie's mysteries out of it. But I don't know. Maybe I'll like it more now. Maybe I'll give it more of a swing now, because I know what I'm getting into, and I've been on this Nolan run. So maybe I'll find its wavelength this time. I'm very curious to hear what you think, Al.
All right, well, stay tuned. We'll be there. Thanks, Brett.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you very much.